Hey guys, today I'm going to review the Apple iPad Air 2, and having used the iPad for the last time with the third generation, which was also the first Retina version of the iPad, and since then sticking to Android tablets, I wanted to give iOS another shot, seeing if things have changed and if I will be finally able to make the switch again to iOS and really enjoy a better tablet experience after all. So let's damn it! Before we are going to take a look at the design and the build quality, let's get around the device and check the buttons and ports first. On the right hand side there are the volume buttons, a microphone. At the top there is the power button, headphone jack. On the right hand side there is nothing. At the bottom we have the stereo speakers and the lightning port. On the back there is another microphone, a camera, and at the front we can see a front facing camera and the home button. In terms of materials, they use most likely Gorilla Glass at the front and aluminum all around the device itself. The aluminum itself feels very premium, it is very well machined, but it is also a little bit cold at some times and it is a little bit slippery. It is nothing to really concern about, but just to keep in mind. Otherwise, the device itself is very lightweight, but due to its size, it can be a bit fatiguing on the wrist or the fingers after all. And one thing, since it is so flat, it is a bit hard lying flat on a surface to hit the actual buttons and the volume rocker. This is a little bit of an issue, and also picking it up is always not so easy because it is just so thin. But in terms of everything else, it feels solid, it feels very premium, it looks very premium, it is well designed after all, not perfectly, but there is not really anything to complain and it just is gorgeous after all. The 9.7-inch IPS display has a resolution of 2048 by 1536 and an aspect ratio of 4:3. The display itself is very sharp, but not exceptional anymore because there are devices out there right now with a way higher resolution, so this is nothing to brag about anymore. For the whites, they are slightly more on the yellow side than it is obvious here on the video, but it is a very nice and pleasant white after all. I would wish for it to be a little bit more on the colder side after all. The blacks though are not as convincing, especially while watching videos. You will notice a lot of details getting missed out in darker scenes and also a quite annoying blue hue all over the screen in general. As for the colors, they are nicely balanced, very nicely saturated and very accurate. What they are not overblown and they are not really punchy or vivid. So again, in movies they can be a little bit dull and washed out, but in general it is pretty nice to look at after all. One thing I have to mention though, the screen itself is a big fingerprint magnet and harder to clean off as I would wish for it to be. We have an anti-glare coating and I did a side-by-side comparison with the iPad Air 2, but you won't really see any difference as long as you don't see what you have to look for. So in general the display is not super impressive, it is not exceptional, it is nothing outstanding, but it does a way more than solid job and you will never think you will be disappointed and not satisfied in general after all. Believe it or not, the actual sound qualities of the speakers are surprisingly good, but let's start off with a demo first. The most obvious thing you definitely noticed first was the speaker position that just isn't really smart. You will block it a lot, you will block it very often, and it will, especially in games, diminish the overall sound experience a lot. But one thing that is really good is the representation of voices. They sound very natural, very accurate, and have a nice solid body to it. In terms of bass, we don't have a lot. The mids are very solid and very satisfying, same as for the highs. So in overall, the experience, especially if you're watching a lot of videos, YouTube videos, and also listen to a lot of podcasts, the experience here will be very good because voices again are really great. As for music and other sounds, the experience is not that great because you have a little bit of lack of bass and the speaker position again, but in general overall the sound experience is way better than I thought, and if those speakers actually would have been on the front, it would have been a great experience. But right now it is still way more than solid and still very good. We are using the A8X chipsets along with 2 GB of RAM, and there is not really anything bad I could say about the performance, because if we check the browsing performance you will notice it is super buttery smooth. Rendering times are also exceptionally fast. One thing I have to admit though, the smooth scrolling is not as good as on some of the Lollipop devices, but this is mostly due to the just different scrolling behavior of iOS. Same goes for all the other apps. You will see Twitter is running perfectly fine. Google Plus also pretty much exactly the same, as you can see, super smooth. And also the rendering is exceptionally fast, exceptionally smooth, and it is just a joy to look at. And I would say the browsing performance, as same goes for the PDF performance, is one of the best, if not the best, I've ever seen on any mobile device out there. And the same also goes for the gaming experience, because games like GT Racing and Asphalt 8 seem to be more detailed and smoother than I've ever seen them on any Android device. But one thing I have to give to the Android devices in my experience seem to be a little bit more responsive and snappy, because if you can see, you always have this slight delay in terms of app switching, because you will see this animation. You will also notice this sometimes on Lollipop, but it is especially noticeable while the whole navigation here on the iOS device, it just doesn't feel, it feels super smooth, it feels super fast, but it doesn't feel super responsive and snappy. But in overall it is great, exceptionally well, consistent, and you only have a rare occasional hiccup or maybe stutter where you maybe have to kill a few apps, but otherwise it is just great. But even with the best performance out there, it is worth nothing if the battery doesn't last long enough. But I can already give you a clear signal here. A full charge needs about 4 hours, which is a little bit longer than I would wish for it to be, but therefore you get a very convincing, very solid and very consistent battery life in overall. The standby drain itself is almost non-existent, and especially if you use the device for more days in a row with lighter use, you will really know to appreciate this. But otherwise you get easily 8 hours of consistent real use out of it. Don't take these 13 hours for granted, because iOS seems to calculate things differently, but I got easily 8 hours if not more out of this device. And one thing I really know to also appreciate is slightly lighter tasks, same as slightly heavier tasks, seems to them pretty much the same. So if you are doing some lightweight games like browsing and maybe watching videos, doesn't drain any different than maybe games. It does a little bit, but not as much as on any other device. So in overall, the battery life is absolutely convincing. Maybe not as good as on the iPad Air 1, but I really had no issues ever at all, and I didn't wish for more. It was way more than good enough for one really heavy day, 2 normal to moderate days, or even 3 or more casual days of lighter use. Now we've reached a point where most of the Android users have a big problem here. I'm talking about the software, iOS in specific, and it is really easy to see the limitations here, because we only have this app grid with no really customization here. This is a big letdown. Otherwise the settings, they are all within the settings app. This maybe is a problem or something you have to get used to. It's not the biggest problem for me. Otherwise, we have a lot of what you could maybe call bloat apps. They are from Apple, and some of them are actually quite good, even though I don't need that many. We also have things like widgets. I don't really see the appeal on a tablet yet. There is also Touch ID, which I found to be more annoying than helpful, at least in my personal case. If you use Touch ID a lot, it is still a great thing, and it really works way more reliable. The device itself, also due to the software, doesn't really slow down, because everything is nicely covered up by all these animations, which is pretty obvious to see. Otherwise, there are bugs, because I have to admit it is not the most stable software out there. I had a few freezes here and there. I had a few apps crashing here and there, like maybe iPad, which does it really often, also Chrome, G+, and even the YouTube app. It is not the most reliable experience, but also I have to say, the experience itself, if you don't use as many things and if you are okay with the limitations, because of, yes, of course, it is way more limited than Android, for example, but you have to ask yourself one question. Is it as capable as Android? And here the answer is no. But you also have to answer yourself another question. can it do all the things you would expect from it to do? And here I have to say yes, because I can use the browser better than ever before. I can use Twitter, no problems here. I can read my news. I can use Google+. I can use Gmail, no issues here at all. I can also read PDFs. I can listen to my podcasts. I can do all the productivity stuff with Google Docs, Google Drive, and Google Mail and everything else. So also videos is no problem. So I don't really have any limitations. Of course, I can't do any super high-end complex stuff, but all I need to do on a tablet, I can do here with ease and with a slightly higher experience, because the apps itself, if you look at the quality in terms of look and feel, most of them just feel a little bit better. And for me, this is a personal thing, of course, but if you get used to it, if you learn to live with the limitations of maybe not having a file explorer and similar things, even though there are file explorers, but they are not the same as on Android, you will really learn to love this device, because the overall software experience still is great, even though quite different compared to Android. Let's continue with the recap and start with the design and build quality first. The device is built exceptionally well, is very lightweight, has a premium build, so there is nothing to really complain about. Also nothing to complain about is the display. It maybe won't blow you away, but you will also never be disappointed, because the overall experience after all is great. Maybe not great, but still very good is the sound experience. The device is very loud and the total balance is also very nice, so you won't get too disappointed once you get used to the maybe not so good speaker position. One thing that won't disappoint you for sure is the exceptional great performance, because the device is extremely smooth, extremely fast, maybe not super responsive and not super snappy if you're used to Android devices, but once you get used to the whole thing iOS works in terms of performance and smoothness, you will definitely be really satisfied. The battery is also one thing you should be really satisfied with, because it maybe needs a little bit longer to charge, but therefore it really holds on long to this charge. 2 days of normal use is no problem, and the device also doesn't get very warm. So in overall, the battery and heat is really done great, because very consistent and very solid. Maybe not as solid as the software, and maybe also a lot of people could think it is very limited and closed down, especially Android users will think so. But the two important questions you have to answer here is, does it do all the things Android does? No. But the way more important question here is, does it do all you need a tablet to do? And if you can answer this with yes, you should be super happy, because at least in my personal experience, I have to say, it does all I wanted to do exceptionally well. Browsing, watching videos, doing my social networks, my mails, any maybe slightly lighter office stuff is all no problem. And due to the very nice design, I really had a great experience after all. And all of this leads me to my recommendation. If you want a really premium design with a great display, a good sound, a great battery life, and a still reliable software, once you get used to it and know its limitations and quirks, you will get a great experience in overall. Of course, coming from Android, maybe the adjustment could be a bit bigger and you also have to maybe rebuy a lot of apps. But once you have all this settled up and get used to it, you will get an amazing experience after all, because the one thing that this device is, it is very solid in all it does. It maybe doesn't do all, but all it does exceptionally well after all. Of course, we should also consider a few competitors out there. The Nexus 9, in my opinion, isn't really a competitor, because it is just not premium enough, just not snappy enough in overall, and the overall experience just can't compete with it, also with the price being a little bit too high. Of course, there are a few other tablets out there that maybe could compete, maybe like the Nvidia Shield tablet, but you can't really compare 8 inches to 9.7, and all the other bigger tablets I've seen out there just don't deliver this what I get on the iPad. So in overall, I have to admit, it is, at least for me, the best big tablet out there. Maybe not by a lot, and it is definitely no perfect device, but it is pretty much the ideal device for me in overall. So this was my review of the Apple iPad Air 2. I hope you liked it. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and if you have any comments, if any further things to say, please leave them in the comments, because I would like to know from you if you are maybe a die-hard Android fan, or maybe you could maybe consider jumping to iOS and enjoy the things as well if you maybe aren't. Okay, Until next time, bye. I'll be back.